Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. It's so great having you joining us today. I am Laura Shrake, and on behalf of the Council of the Great Lakes Region, it is a pleasure to welcome you. We have a very interesting data-driven webinar for you today. During the next hour, we will hear from EcoFocus, a leading market research company who will unpack the results of their 2024 survey that tracked sustainability perceptions and actions among consumers. The survey was a national survey in the United States. And for us today, EcoFocus has taken those survey results and analyzed the trends that surfaced in the 8 US Great Lakes states. The Canadian provinces were not covered in last year's survey. So the results we'll hear about today do not include the Great Lakes region in Canada. However, we are looking forward to future surveys and data sets that will hopefully include them. And while, as I mentioned, the analysis we will hear about today is covering the US states in the region, we know that the Great Lakes region is much more. The transnational Great Lakes Economic Region includes 8 US states from Minnesota to New York, the 2 Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec, and many First Nations and tribes. Not only is it home to one of the world's largest surface freshwater systems, holding 84% of North America's surface freshwater and 20% of the world's, it is also home to over 110 million people. And based on recent 2025 data, if a country, the region would be the 16th largest country in the world by population. And then turning to economic output, with a GDP of around 8 trillion US dollars, it would be the 3rd largest national economy in the world if the region was a country. So with its growing population and economic strength, it becomes evident that consumers in the Great Lakes region have significant purchasing power. So if sustainability matters to consumers here and environmentally friendly products and packaging are a priority to them, with that being factored into their purchasing decisions, then companies, brands, and regulators should certainly take note. So to shed more light on this, we have with us today the CEO of EcoFocus, Jerry Croft. CGLR has been working with Jerry and his team for several months now, and we have featured some of their articles on our Great Lakes Insights, which I will put links to them in the chat in case anyone wants to check those out after the webinar. Based on the results of their national survey, EcoFocus has been able to break down sustainability trends and has explored how sustainability is factoring into decision-making for today's consumers. So I expect it to be a very interesting and insightful presentation. We should have a few minutes at the end for questions. So if you have any, please type them in the Zoom Q&A box and we'll try to get to them. But Jerry, thank you so much for being here. I know you've got a lot you want to unpack and share with us today, so it's my pleasure to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Laura. It's a great introduction. And as you mentioned, we're going to today take a look at some of the data behind consumer attitudes and concerns and behaviors, specifically taking a look at the Great Lakes region. Full disclosure, my wife and kids and I have been residents of Northern Illinois since 1983. I hate to date myself. So we have a vested interest in this area and love it in the area. And one of the attractions is the value of the Great Lakes region. We've got quite a bit of data to share, and we do want to leave time for the Q&A. So as Laura said, the deck will be made available to you after the webinar. So some of the slides get a little data heavy, and I may go through them a little bit fast, but don't worry, you'll get a chance to dig into it after the webinar. I do want to get into the data, but I want to give you just a little bit of background about EcoFocus. EcoFocus was started in 2010, and we're a market research company that focuses primarily on sustainability. We cover a wide range of attitudinal behavior questions, and for this webinar, we've selected some key, what we think are some key key data points that can kind of connect a red thread towards a conclusion as we go through, and hopefully you'll be able to see that red thread emerge as we go through. As Laura said, we're a national survey. We do a syndicated study. We use 4,000 respondents. That's considered a very significant number of respondents. It results in a low margin of error of about 1.55%. We work really hard to make sure that we balance the demographics to the U.S. Census so that the data is scalable and reliable, especially when we start to crosstab. And in terms of some of the methodology, as I mentioned, we do a large sample size, but we have programs in place to filter out what we call straight liners, people that if they're answering all of the, if you think of a 1 to 10, if they're answering all 10, that's probably not good data. And so we also have ways to filter out bots and so on. So we're really proud of our data and feel that it's the kind of data that we can rely on and use to to develop strategies, which is kind of my background. I have spent the last couple of decades in the C-suite, primarily in strategic positions, and I've always really liked to have data to support both tactical decisions and as well as strategic decisions. And again, I'm repeating some of the things that Laura said. Our survey has covered the 8 U.S. states, and we do plan to go into Canada next year. So when we release our study in 2025, we will indeed be including the Canadian provinces, especially those around the Great Lakes. And once again, I'm emphasizing some of the things that Laura said, but the Great Lakes makes up 20% of the Earth's fresh surface water. And it's an incredible source for drinking water to more than 40 million residents. And as I mentioned, we are one of them. And so we have a vested interest in preserving this incredible watershed. Today, we've kind of selected some key questions out of our survey that we think are relative to the Great Lakes and, as I mentioned, the red thread of trying to see where the data is kind of taking us in terms of being able to make some decisions in terms of how we as individuals can work to improve the environment, as well as how businesses can potentially use the data to help us improve the environment. We're going to talk about concerns about water quality. Specifically, we talked a little bit about microplastics, understanding the importance of the environmental issues in dealing with the consumer appreciation for the understanding of the importance, the challenges of consumers to translate knowledge into action, what they expect from corporations in environmental action, and then try to get into some practical things that we can do as individuals, as I said, and as businesses. So let's just jump right in. 78% of the U.S. Great Lakes region residents are worried about climate change threats, and 73% about fossil fuel extraction. That's a really big number. And that's 4 points greater than the national, which we'll see in a later slide where we compare some of this to the national slide, to the national numbers. Okay, let's advance. Water-related environmental concerns. When asked more specifically about environmental concerns, water-related issues were among the highest environmental priorities, reflecting the region's connection to their critical freshwater resources. Core concerns focus heavily on plastic, water bottles, debris in the oceans and waterways at 70%, and water pollution at 69%, both really very high levels. And as I mentioned, they're very concerned about microplastics. with 51% very or extremely concerned about their presence in water, food, and the air. Similarly, 45% show high concern about plastic used in packaging, both for food and packaging for water. And once again, I'll mention again that this is got a lot of information on this slide. I won't run down every one of them, but just kind of highlighting what rises to the top. And when we look at this, for example, we can look at PFAS, the forever chemicals at 50%. So that's really very close to the microplastics. So there's a lot of concern about chemicals, both what could be in their food and in their water. And then what we like to do, and this is part of the red thread, is take a look at how does this look from an age cohort standpoint. And we can see that the concern is highest amongst Gen Z and millennials. So if you kind of take a look quickly at the red arrows, you can see that the Gen Z and the millennials, what's really interesting to me is not only the numbers that rise to the top, but where we can see that boomers down at the bottom of microwavable plastic containers, it drops all the way down to 29%. So not sure we have the answer to that, but we can definitely see a trend emerging that the younger generation, the Zs and the millennials, have a significantly greater awareness and concern about the environment. So let's try to have a little bit of fun here. We don't have a poll set up for today, but you can kind of make a mental note, or if you have a piece of paper, move it off to the side. There were two parts of what we were trying to do here. One, we wanted to understand if people perceived a difference between global warming and climate change. So we split the respondents in half, and half the group got the very same question. The only difference was whether it said climate change or global warming. And so we asked, how many of you believe that climate change or global warming is even real? Do you believe that it's real? And if you do believe that it's real, do you believe that it's mostly caused by humans or man-made? Do you think it's partially created by humans and partially a natural phenomenon? Or do you think it's just simply a natural phenomenon? So think about your answer, and I'll give you the results of the survey here in just a minute. I can tell you that 79% of residents here in the Great Lakes region believe that it's at least partially due to human activity. But on next slide, I'm going to dive into the numbers here. So what's amazing to me, I don't want to even start at the top. I want to go to the bottom. 1 out of 10 people don't even believe there is a thing called global warming or climate change. And I will tell you, by the way, that the responses were virtually the same for each half of the group of the 2,000 for climate change and global warming. So they view those as essentially the same when it comes to these attitudes. But I'll tell you, 1 out of 10 people not even sure there is a thing called global warming or climate change. And I can tell you that I've got a family member that fits into that group, which makes for interesting conversation at Thanksgiving dinner table, needless to say. But here we can take a look at both how the Great Lakes region compares to the rest of the United States. And when it comes to mostly man-made, there's a significant 5 points greater than the rest of the United States that believe that it's mostly man-made. That switches a little bit when it comes to partially a natural phenomenon and partially man-made, where the Great Lakes region makes up, the national makes up a little bit of ground there. But it's very similar numbers when it comes to mostly a natural phenomenon and not sure there is such a thing. But when you stack this up, you're into the 20%, 23, 24% of people that are really not sure that we have anything to do with this, which you can find that as an opportunity or a challenge. 80% of the U.S. Great Lakes region adults consider the environment at least sometimes when choosing products they buy and use. So I'm just going to repeat that for a second. So 80%, 8 out of 10 people say that they consider the environment when it comes to purchasing. And we've got quite a bit of data to try to break down, where is it and what items are there items that are more conducive to consideration of environmental considerations or less. And we have some data. If you're interested in taking a little bit of a dive into that, you'll need to reach out to us offline because that's a deeper study that's separate from what we have here. But once again, and you're starting to see a trend emerge here, the environmental consideration is significantly higher amongst Gen Z and millennials, with 86% of the millennials saying that they consider the environment when they're making purchases. Now, that's the good news, but not too surprising. The state of the economy is even a higher concern than environmental concerns when it comes to making purchases. And once again, here we can see where there's some differences. And I think it's not too surprising that when we go down and look at the threat of global warming and climate change, there's a 4-point difference, as well as fossil fuel with a 5-point difference, as indicated in the earlier slide, than the national for us here in the Great Lakes. So, advance. So at various stages throughout the presentation, we're going to kind of stop and do a little bit of a level set and ask, okay, what can businesses do to stand out? If we know that there's a high level of concern about the environment, there's a concern about plastic debris in the waterways, especially plastic bottles, and there's a concern when it comes to people are considerate when it comes to making purchases. So what can businesses do to kind of stand out? One, communicate with residents, consumers, and employees. And I'm going to kind of underline employees. You'll see this kind of popping up throughout how your company is safeguarding the Great Lakes watershed. Discuss how this improves water quality and residents' health and well-being. And businesses have a unique opportunity to enhance environmental education through employee engagement. And as you'll see later, education factors, there's a significant number of people that feel well informed, but we've got some real gaps in terms of what they trust and what they believe. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And going back the slide, I just want to make a point. Interestingly enough, Eleanor and I had a meeting with a group here last week, and turns out one of the people in the group was a co-author of the term green hushing, in terms of businesses in particular that may have a sustainability plan or an environmental plan, but for whatever reason don't necessarily promote it. And we can draw our own conclusions as to why, but I just wanted to make that point, that getting out in front and engaging with both consumers and employees is a positive step. Things as individuals, we can start to reduce single-use plastic. These are pretty obvious. Choose reusable bags and bottles and containers. Preventing litter and recycle. We know quite a bit about recycling, that there's a lot of confusion around what can I recycle. If I do recycle, is it actually being recycled? And we know that the numbers are pretty small in terms of, disappointingly small in terms of how much doesn't actually get recycled. But we can vote with our dollars. We can support businesses and products that use sustainable packaging, for example, make best efforts to reduce overall consumption. That's a lesson that I could learn personally. And we can embrace responsible waste management. So it's important for us to be proactive as individuals. Climate change acceptance and efforts to lead an eco-friendly and sustainable lifestyle has become a broad trend in the United States. However, without knowledge, i.e. education of the contributors to climate change, we as a nation and each of us individually will not be able to effectively reduce ongoing environmental damage and make a positive impact on preventing climate change. The good news is that our data shows that residents have a high level of knowledge about some of the key factors. For example, 83% are aware that less than 30% of plastic packaging is recycled in the US. And my wife just told me there was a report more recently that it shows even lower numbers. That's an area where I think we all could use more transparency in terms of what is being recycled and what isn't. Methane is they're aware that methane is a potent greenhouse gas, more than 28 times worse than CO2. So there's a high level of knowledge here of the residents, and the plastics can only be recycled a few times until they become unusable. That's a nice high percentage that's aware of some of these key factors that lead to environmental awareness. And now let's take a look at how it breaks down by ages. And we can see that Gen Z and millennials and Gen X and boomers, it's really pretty flat at the top number, 81 to 86%. Boomers are a little bit more aware of the lack of recycling. The same is true in terms of the methane, but then it drops back down in terms of plastics can be recycled fewer times. So in this case, we're seeing kind of a mixed bag between the age cohorts in terms of what their awareness level is. But in spite of that, it's still pretty high across the board. The survey data also indicates that knowledge about climate impact is connected to priorities for environmental protection. Among residents who consider environmental factors when making purchase decisions, clear priorities around environmental efforts start to emerge. And this includes reducing plastic use, which is rated the highest at 69%, followed closely by limiting household garbage at 67%, and supporting companies that protect rainforests, coral reefs, or other ecological areas at 65%. Once again, let's take a look and see how this breaks down by age groups. And we can see that in terms of supporting companies that protect rainforests, Gen Z jumps to the top of the list here. So if we're going to take keep an eye on this red thread, we're seeing that there's some pretty good knowledge in terms of awareness, and we're seeing it particularly starting to skew towards the Gen Z and the millennials. However, translating that knowledge into action is a problem. 54%, more than half of the people say it's hard to figure out what choices to make in order to have a more eco-friendly home or lifestyle. And it's even higher among Gen Z and millennials. So one of the things that we can be doing is to really start to think about how do we make this messaging clearer and try to help avoid the confusion and the uncertainty. Let me take another look here. So reducing waste and pollution is just plain common sense. So 84% agree that reducing waste and pollution is just common sense. And for those of you that want to stick around to the end, I'm going to ask you a question if you know what the definition of horse sense is. And I'm not going to tell you in the webinar here, but if you stick around to the end and you want to know what the definition of horse sense is, let me know and I'll tell you. And that comes as a joke to me whenever I hear common sense. But here we go, boomers. Boomers say that reducing waste and pollution is just plain common sense. So to kind of summarize the area here a little bit, Great Lakes residents show stronger comprehension of technical environmental concepts, i.e. they know that methane is an important greenhouse gas and that low plastic recycling rates, referencing the slide I was at before, then practical application, that they have a low confidence in making the right environmental choices at 54%. So they've got a high awareness, but they're not real confident in terms of how they can put this into action. Second, the high awareness of plastic recycling limitations, coupled with strong interest in plastic reduction, suggests that knowledge of environmental challenges directly influence setting their priorities. And third, the generational differences in practical application of environmental goals, particularly among Gen Z, indicate a need and an opportunity for better environmental solutions and education to create awareness of and trust in these solutions. And I'm going to underline the word trust. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So once again, what can businesses do? Educating residents about solutions can make you an environmental leader as a business. You can design and target educational messages to reach your audiences, specifically younger cohorts. Messaging to employees, once again, is a great way to promote corporate environmental and eco-friendly initiatives. And it has a tremendous ripple effect on friends and family. Implementing sustainability plans by incorporating sustainability considerations into business decision-making. That's one of the areas that I enjoy working the most in terms of how do we do this strategically. And support purpose-driven organizations like the Council of the Great Lakes region, our host today. And I would take it's kind of a plug here. They do some great work. So if you're not too familiar, please dig back in with what the great work they're doing and how we can help support them. In terms of individual action, some of these are common sense, but they deserve re-mentioning. Reducing food waste and compost scraps and yard waste. Although composting scraps and yard waste is not as easy as it sounds, but it's an area that we can look into. I can tell you that in my area, my village in Northern Illinois, we're actually, as individuals, we're talking to them about developing a composting program that we can participate in. So that's one of the things that we can do as individuals. I have a daughter who's a vegetarian, and my doctor keeps telling me to eat more plant-based foods. I wish I could completely do that, but reducing meat consumption is a help if we can do it. And I'm guilty of not doing it, but that's an area where we can start to help reduce methane emissions. Making smart energy choices, such as the kinds of things that we do with water heaters, LED lighting, etc. And again, once again, voting with your dollars, supporting local businesses and companies that are doing their best to minimize their impact. Avoid purchasing single-use items whenever possible, and when it's available, using public transportation are some really important and key ways that we as individuals can work to make things better. Okay, so far we've seen that residents in the region have strong concern, and high knowledge about climate change aspects and the causes. Now we're going to talk about how these concerns and knowledge translate into action, albeit at varying levels. Excuse me for a second. We touched on this earlier, but just as a reminder, as a kind of a place setter to set this section off, 80% consider environmental reasons when choosing their products that they buy. When asked about eco-friendly behaviors, the data indicates a clear hierarchy of green behavior adoption, that it's based on convenience and available infrastructure. In other words, easy solutions are adopted more widely than those requiring more effort. For example, the widespread use of reusable water bottles at 76% and cold water laundry practices at 72% demonstrates successful adoption of what are convenient environmental behaviors. However, more complex or infrastructure-dependent actions, i.e. composting, for example, in my village, where the infrastructure just isn't there, Whether it's complex or infrastructure dependent, we see significantly lower participation, exemplified by composting kitchen waste reported by 34%, or taking empty bottles or containers to be refilled at the store by only 30%. The difference between simple and complex behaviors highlights how convenience influences adoption rates. Lower engagement when it comes to activism. Few engage in environmental action outside of everyday choices. So again, when you get the deck, you can kind of study this a little bit, but only 5% of the respondents contacted a business to complain about its products because they harm the environment. And only 19% voted for candidates because of their position on environmental issues. Depending upon where you fall in your degree of wanting to participate in activism, this will give you some idea that seems like when it's easier, more convenient, or there's infrastructure, it's easier for us to get behind it. These that require a little bit more work or more risk are not too surprisingly a little harder to adopt. This is a particularly interesting topic for me, and again, I'll touch on it maybe a little bit later, especially in the Q&A, or if somebody wants to go offline. But Minnesota has adopted EPR regulations. Illinois is in the research phase. New York put it to a vote. It didn't pass, but it's still being considered. And so there's more and more consideration in terms of EPR regulations. I'm really not getting into that today in this deck, but it's something that I'm keeping an eye on. And the reason I mention that is EPR is extended producer responsibility, and it not only affects the products, but it also is going to have a huge impact on the packaging that products are put in. So just taking a look at this, packaging is important. I try to buy products and packaging that is recyclable. 64% in the Great Lakes region, 4% greater than national. I try to buy beverages that use less plastic. So what's really good is that we've seen that people in the Great Lakes region are very aware and very concerned about plastics finding their way into the waterways. And now we can start to see that the Great Lakes region residents are actually taking action and doing their best to buy less products, fewer products that don't have packaging that's recyclable or are in plastic. And plastic is a hot topic. I don't think we're ever going to get away from the use of plastic, but I think there's some things that we can do to reduce the use of plastic. And there's a lot of discussion about the impact of plastic. So that let's save that for another day. Once again, taking a look at how this breaks down generationally, in terms of packaging impacts, I've changed what I buy because of the type or amount of packaging. In the Great Lakes region, the average is 41%, but you can see that this really jumps up with Gen Z and millennials. The headline for this is doesn't really tell the story. The story behind this is we asked the question, we're faced with many problems in the United States. For each of the following, are we spending too little, too much, or about the right amount of money on the following areas? And two of the questions were protecting the environment and developing alternative energy, green energy sources. And 52% feel like, and whether this is, it's kind of blended all in, whether it's us as individuals or state or national government, but are we as a country spending enough money and resources to protect the environment? And only half of the people feel like we are. So there's opportunity for more work to be done in this area. And once again, supporting some of these regulations and investment from both businesses and companies, I think will help with that. We're getting close to the end. Laura, are we doing okay on time? I see you're muted, but are we doing okay on time?
Yeah, we're good. You've got probably another 5 or 10 minutes if you want before we break for Q&A.
Okay, good. I can talk slower now. Thank you, Laura. So the next one was, again, consumers' expectations in terms of where do businesses and where do companies fit in? And and the respondents indicated 43% responded that corporations can reduce waste. Um, there's an opportunity there to kind of take a deeper dive, and we're going to look at some of these, where some of these questions lead us to our 2025 study is, okay, if you feel like corporations can reduce waste, can you be more specific? Um, and so for our 2025 study, we're going to take into consideration some of these responses like this and ask ourselves, is there an opportunity to take a deeper dive? So we're excited to leverage some of the learning that we had from this latest study into our next study. But people feel like 19% of the people feel like they can reduce water use. And I think I mentioned this in the beginning, but unless otherwise noted, where we have the slides comparing all of this data is of the residents of the 8 US states in the Great Lakes region. So these are not national numbers unless we note it differently. Okay, so once again, what can businesses do? It's starting to sound like a broken record. Make sustainable choices more accessible and convenient for consumers. Um, and convenience is a key thing. So if you're going to the zoo, it's kind of hard to, unless you take your water bottle with you, it's hard to avoid buying a single-use plastic bottle of water. So these are some areas where we can talk about how do we make it more convenient for consumers to be more eco-friendly. Focus on waste reduction at the corporate level and in the packaging of products. Packaging is a really a big topic. And educating consumers about what you're doing and how it helps them to have a more environmentally friendly lifestyle. And once again, what we can do, oops, did I just do businesses? Okay, what can individuals do? Advocate for policy changes. A lot of things are dependent upon policy. We can vote, we can sign petitions, etc. Support local environmental groups, donate, volunteer your time, help them out. These groups are really important. Use your purchasing power in voting with your dollars to support ethical brands and and businesses that are committed to sustainability. Millennials and Gen Zs, according to a Nielsen IQ study, are going to control the U.S. purchasing power in the next 4.5 years. That's only 4.5 years from now. And so we as businesses really need to keep an eye on these trends and these attitudes from the millennials and the Gen Z. It's going to be an important part of the future. And this is how it breaks down by age. So again, the Nielsen study said that 35% of the purchasing power in 2030 will be from Gen Z and 30% from millennials. So I think it's really important that we start to educate and plan for the future as we're starting to summarize this, and we take a look at all of the data and what is the red thread. And I think consumers it boils down to they're concerned about their watershed. They're concerned about plastic in the waterways. They want to reduce waste and pollution if we can find a way to make it easier and clearer and less confusing, and they have the confidence that it's happening. Packaging is an important part. They're looking for better packaging, and they really want to hold businesses accountable for their eco-friendliness. So just to wrap it up, I think there's no time to delay. We've got 4.5 years to really focus on shifting and making sure that we're shifting to a more eco-friendly product, packaging, and messaging, so that when the millennials and the Gen Zs hit their stride in 2030, we're out ahead of it. That's it. We want to say thank you for your time and interest in EcoFocus. My contact information will be in the deck that you get. And I want to take this opportunity to, say thank you to Laura and her team at CJLR for inviting us to be part of this.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. I know a lot of work went into carrying out that survey and then analyzing the results and breaking it down even further for to focus on the Great Lakes region. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. And some of the things that the topic areas that you touched on, and you mentioned this also, but the Council of the Great Lakes region does have programs in some of those areas like circular economy and water stewardship. So just to our audience today, if anybody is interested in knowing more about those program areas that the Council of the Great Lakes region is leading, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to share more information and get those of you who are interested involved. But we do have a little bit of time for some questions. So let's go ahead and get into it. I should mention first, though, that also with Jerry is Eleanor Gata. She's the VP of Research and Strategy at EcoFocus. Eleanor is off camera, but she may jump on with her mic to support answering some questions should that be needed. So Eleanor, I invite you to jump in as you and Jerry might see fit as we get going along. But I want to go ahead and start first with some questions regarding trends. And I know that EcoFocus has been running its annual survey since 2010. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen consumer expectations around sustainability evolve over the past decade, and if there have been any surprising or significant shifts in consumer sustainability attitudes in this year's survey compared to previous years? I think it would be interesting to understand how sustainability is influencing purchasing decisions, today versus 5 years ago or, before. So I'm curious if there's been any real behavioral change or more of an awareness to the shift. So would love to just sort of hear your thoughts on those trends.
Um, that's a big question, as you know, and it's good. Um, we we really are taking while we have data back to 2010, we're really taking a look at the last time we took a look at where the trends are. We went back to 2018, and we all kind of have to remember that in the middle of between 2018 and 20 here, we had a thing called the pandemic, which we're anxious to get the next 2025 study out so that we have 2 years in a row post-pandemic to really start to see what's happening with the trends. In addition, in getting our 2025 study out to be able to see that against 2024, we're going to be able to also see what potential political implications are relative to policy, national, federal policy. We think that we fielded the study in the heat of the election campaign, so we think that some of that might already be baked into this. But I guess what I'm doing is a gratuitous plug for coming back next year to where we can start to look at whether changes from 24 to 2025 relative to the national policy. But trying to answer your question a little bit, we've seen a notable shift in consumer attitudes towards sustainability since 2018. There's been a gradual decline in those who strongly agree that convenience is a priority in packaging, dropping from 24% in 2018 to 15% in 2024. That's suggesting a growing willingness to sacrifice convenience for sustainability. So that's a data point. At the same time, consumers have maintained high concerns about national economic issues. That's stayed really flat at 91% since 2018. They've become slightly less concerned about climate change. It's actually dropped from 87% in 2018 to 78% in 2024. And looking at this, we're trying to see what might be behind that. And so economic prioritization, I think that kind of goes without saying that no matter what's going on in Washington or what's going on anywhere in the recent history, we're all concerned about the economy and our personal economy. So that staying flat is not a surprise at 90%. However, some of the consumers might believe that sustainability efforts by businesses and government policies have been making sufficient progress. So maybe they're less concerned because they think, okay, businesses, since we've been talking about it more in the last 5 years, 6 years, that maybe it's actually starting to solve itself. And that might be reducing their immediacy of their concern. So while that's gone down, um, they consumers might have a false sense of security that someone else is handling it. So we don't know. Um, there's also probably a thing of issue fatigue. You know, after years of climate messaging, some consumers may experience emotional fatigue. It's just like, I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of talking about it. Um, okay, I'm aware or I'm not aware, or I don't believe. It kind of goes back to the fun of that question. Um, and seeing what there's just a belief is. And then, as I mentioned just a minute ago, the political polarization. Um, like I said, we fielded the study in the summer of 2024, which coincided with the election year, um, and it might have heightened the political uh, impact on climate. So those could be some of the reasons why the concern has gone down from 2018. But again, it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2025.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next question was like, where do you see consumer sustainability expectations heading in the next few years, and emerging trends we should be watching for? And it'll be interesting to see if the trends that you've seen from the past decade, if it continues as we move forward.
Well, I think we just I don't want this to be political. I don't think you want it to be political either. So I'll just stay in the middle and just say, the current administration has wanted to pull out of the Paris Accord. Um, eh, you know, uh, Environmental issues are not taking the high road in terms of fossil fuels and things like that. So that's going on, and everybody has their own opinion in terms of what that is. But we can't ignore the impact of the changes at the federal level in terms of policy. And we just don't know. We don't know how that's going to impact. But what we do know, both from the data and from living in this space. So I'll try to be clear on what the data is telling us and what we're hearing as we navigate in the world of sustainability, that large word. Consumers want businesses to take the lead, but they don't want to pay for it. Um, Now, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we did a side study on the willingness to pay more, um, and it was very, very informative, but it was a small study and it was a sample, but it was kind of our toe in the water of really trying to explore that. Are people willing to pay more? And if so, how much more? Interestingly enough, that we found less resistance to price elasticity for coffee and cars, um, as opposed to milk and water. Um, People want a more sustainable option for milk and water, but they don't want to pay for it. But they are willing to pay more for a sustainable option for their coffee and for their car. Um, and then I'm really optimistic about the impact of the EPR level laws, because those are done at the state level. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the Fed. Um, and the essence of this and I'm not an expert on EPR. I'm studying it and I'm interested in it and I know a little bit about it, which is dangerous. But essentially, it's the extended producer responsibility is what it stands for. And it's going to put the burden on the businesses to be more sustainable, both with the product and the packaging, or there will be a penalty. And um, people respond to penalties. So I think EPR is going to have an equal amount of impact in this area.
Yeah, and I think it's important for legislators to be paying attention and aware of these trends also, and consumer priorities as well as businesses. I want to go ahead and I have a couple more questions for you, but I do want to get to some that have just come in from some of our audience. And I'll just go in the order that they came in. The first one is asking about how you accounted for Gen Z residents that have not reached the age to make their own consumption decisions. For example, young Gen Z residents who don't shop for their household. Can you give a little bit of information on that?
That's a really, really good question, and it's one that comes up. And I'm going to turn to Eleanor to help me out with that one because she's the scientist here and the expert in this area.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Over to you then, Eleanor.
Hi, this is Eleanor. So yeah, for this study, we only included adults. So in other words, 18 years or older. So technically, when we talk about Gen Z, we are only talking about those that are, from our point of view, the ones that are more involved in active consumption, for example, grocery shopping, potentially for their small household of maybe themselves. And we do ask questions specifically about their behaviors, whether they do shop for their household, if they are the primary shopper or not. So we do take account of that. Gen Z is not everyone in that age cohort, only that is considered an adult. And of course, as Jerry said, as this cohort becomes ages into adulthood and independence over the next few years, especially until 2030, as they're becoming the predominant purchasing power, we will see how their behaviors are impacting the products in the market, especially when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Eleanor. And I guess it's good to point out that Jerry's given us a nice array of the analysis and the breakdown of results, but there were a lot more questions that went into this survey to give you the information you need to draw some of these conclusions. So I guess that's important that we're only seeing a little bit of all the data that you guys have collected. Um, Another question is asking about third-party validations and verifications, and if you evaluated whether they played a role in influencing consumer perceptions or purchasing power or purchasing behavior. So that would be like science-based targets initiative or water stewardship certifications, any certified organic. Did you look into that level?
Um, I'll give Eleanor a chance to pull up whatever she has, but we did include a significant number of certifications. At a high level, certifications do have an impact and a positive impact. We do have data on certain certifications that we included, and at a high level, they do have an impact. And I don't know if this question came up where Eleanor was able to look at this, so I don't want to put her on the spot, but were you able to pull anything up, Eleanor?
Yeah, so we actually asked about certifications of, I mean, quite a few different certifications. We're definitely not comprehensive because there are a lot. One of them that might be relevant here is Marine Stewardship Council. Just to mention one, there, as I said, there are lots of others that are related to energy, to food, to just practices, business practices. And if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out and we can share some more information. On the high level, the key things to know about certifications are that awareness is quite varied, especially with the more niche certifications and the newer ones. But once we look at people who are aware with certain certifications, purchase influence is very high. So typically, if you're aware, 80% or more feel that the certification, when they know about it, see it on a package, makes an influence on whether they purchase or not.
Great. That's really interesting. Thank you, Eleanor.
One that
Uh,
I can get to anecdotally, I don't know the numbers, but the Clean Label project, for example, has a low awareness, but of those that are aware, it has incredible influence. So balancing the awareness and the is kind of the key, because once people are aware of it, it does have a huge impact, as Eleanor said.
It's interesting. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to try to get to these last few questions. Well, actually, one is doesn't look like it's a question, but somebody who is looks like with the Isaac Walton League supporting a program called Green Step Cities, and which has expanded, and now their county has a zero waste goal. So basically, the point is, you know, people can make a difference. So the suggestions that you were making in terms of activism, getting involved in your communities on that individual basis, I think this is a really good point of, you know, one person with many other individuals form a community and really can have an impact. So thank you, Jill, for making that point. And then we have a question asking about AI. This is interesting. So Jerry, how do you imagine the utility of artificial intelligence helping to build increasingly sustainable and resilient commercial approaches and consumer sentiments?
Wow, that's wow. All I can say is wow. And I wish we had more time. Uh, if I were to do a poll, I think I'm the oldest AI advocate on the planet, and certainly probably in the room. I think there's just, and we're employing AI in a couple of different projects that I'm working on. I think AI is going to have a tremendous, tremendous positive impact. I remember Schultz mentioning that what Google was being able to find the needle in the haystack. I think AI is probably going to put that on tenfold, of being able to find the needle in the haystack and to allow us to get to things faster and better. However, the big however is, I think there's two big howevers. One of them is AI still hallucinates, and like we'll use AI to help us find something, and then we have to go back and absolutely verify that what it pulled up is accurate, because AI will always sound convincingly 100% spot on, but it's not, at least not yet. So I think when we start to deploy AI into a lot of different things, and one of the sustainability conferences I was at, there were several AI companies that were working on recycling, where somebody could walk up to a recycling bin and there would be a camera there, and it would have recognition and tell you which slot to put it in. I can't tell you how many restaurants I go into where I'm completely confused as to what goes where. But I digress. I think AI is going to have an incredibly positive impact on our ability to solve some of these problems, but we have to do it with care.
Thank you, Jerry. That's a very good point. And with that, unfortunately, our time has flown by.
Oh,
and
no.
we don't have any time left for any more questions. Thank you, Jerry, and Eleanor as well, for sharing the survey results and parsing out the Great Lakes states for us to really home in on the consumer sustainability trends. I'm definitely looking forward to your 2025 survey and including Canada in the geography covered as well. Before we close, I do also want to thank the Fred and Barbara Erb Family Foundation. They support the Council of the Great Lakes Region's business and sustainability network building and engagement, which includes many of the webinars we're able to deliver each month, including this one. So thank you to the Erb Family Foundation. And then lastly, we will have a survey going out, another survey. This one is a webinar survey. After this, our attendees will receive it by email, and we would be grateful if you could share any feedback and suggestions on what topics or research you would like to hear about this year. And with that, thank you again. Thank you to our audience, and thank you especially Jerry for being our guest today and sharing all this insightful information.